Our next speaker will be John Rowe. John is a lobbyist for the Academy, and he will be updating us about what is going on in Washington, D.C. So please give a warm welcome to John Rowe.
Good morning. Is this mic working? There we go. Most people have a favorite restaurant that we like to go back to again and again, but has anybody ever given you the advice that don't ever look in the kitchen of your favorite restaurant? What you see might turn your stomach? Well, I've been in a position for the last 7 or 8 years to look at the kitchen at the FDA, and believe me, it does turn my stomach. It's a broken agency. We've known it for a long time. Most of you have known it, and much to my surprise, even the FDA knows it now. I have in my sweaty little palm here a confidential report. It's titled FDA Science and Mission at Risk. Report of the Subcommittee on Science and Technology of the Food and Drug Administration. It's dated November of 2007. Every page is marked confidential. It was meant to be an internal document, but I don't know how confidential it could be since I got it off the internet. I want to read excerpts from just 3 paragraphs of their own report. The subcommittee concluded that science at the FDA is in a precarious position. The agency suffers from serious scientific deficiencies and is not positioned to meet current or emerging regulatory responsibilities. The agency scientific foundation. On the next page, they continue, the FDA's inability to keep up with scientific advances means that American lives are at risk. American lives are at risk, according to the FDA's internal document. They say, while the world of drug discovery and development has undergone revolutionary change, shifting from cellular to molecular and gene-based approaches, FDA's evaluation methods have remained largely unchanged over the last half-century. The last half-century. Quoting again, the world looks to the FDA as a leader. Today, not only can the agency not lead, it cannot even keep up. And just one more excerpt. Referring to their information technology structure at the FDA. The ITA situation at FDA is problematic at best, and at worst, it is dangerous. Systems fail frequently. There are inadequate emergency backup systems in place. Recent system failures have resulted in the loss of FDA data. Critical data reside in large warehouses, sequestered in piles and piles of paper documents. There's no backup for these records, which include critical clinical trial information. And it goes on and on and on for another 64 pages plus a bunch of appendices, basically saying again and again and again that they are incompetent, and I agree. They're right, they are incompetent. But yet, in a very heavy-handed manner, they still keep their foot on the neck of many, many practitioners, doing everything they can to get in the way of professionals who believe in complementary or alternative medicine, those who want to practice integrative medicine, those who manufacture or sell nutritional supplements, and those who practice biological dentistry. good health care in this country is really being interfered by a bunch of bungling bureaucrats. Now, I do apologize to you at the moment because I don't have visuals for you here. I didn't know I was going to be giving this talk until this morning, but it will be on camera, and if anyone doesn't want to wait for that, see me the rest of the day. I will be here all day, and we can swap business cards. I'll write this up and email it to you. In one way or another, if you want the information, we'll make sure that it's available to you. Now, I personally have been at war with the FDA for 8 years now. Part of it, I confess, is personal. My oldest daughter died of a type of cancer. 2 very, very, very promising drugs in the late stages of development that have about a 60% efficacy rate. Couldn't get my hands on it for her because of the FDA standing in the way. So I say that as a means of full disclosure that I do have a very personal reason to dislike them. But there's also a professional reason. For several years, I worked for Congressman Dan Burton of Indiana when he chaired the House Committee on Government Reform and Oversight. And shortly after I went to work there, I learned a great deal about the mercury issue through the Marisol battle, the childhood vaccination series. And then the congressman said, check into this controversy about dental fillings. There's accusations being made that some of those dental fillings are dangerous. You know, initially I was pretty skeptical. I thought, no, the dental profession wouldn't do that to us. They're healers. They're professionals. They're good people. But it didn't take more than a few days of investigation to realize, yeah, there is something here. And the more I dug into it, the more it became clear to me that the anti-amalgam people were basing their opinions on fact, some of it from personal experiences, a lot of it from peer-reviewed scientific literature. The pro-amalgam people were basing their claims of safety on anecdotes, which were rarely backed up by believable documentation. And so we had a series of hearings then that I was the staff coordinator for and Congressman Burton chaired. And it was frustrating. It was frustrating on several levels. Our first 2 hearings focused on health, and the anti-amalgam people came in, compelling testimony, accurate testimony, well documented, leaving no doubt that their side of the argument was correct. Your Dr. Rich Fisher was one of the witnesses. Boyd Haley was another. Many other excellent witnesses. The other side, again, came in with anecdotes. Oh, we've been doing this for 150 years, and if there's anything wrong with it, we would know about it. And truthfully, even though it was clear from the congressional records, the facts were on the side of the anti-amalgam people, it didn't gain much traction because the members of Congress and their staffs had the same attitude that I initially had, that no, dentists wouldn't do that to people. They're healers, they're professionals, they're going to do the right thing. And so truthfully, we didn't gain much traction on the health hearings and the health arguments. So we shifted our focus to the environment because that's very, very popular and people are willing to embrace doing the right thing for the environment. We had one such hearing while I was still there and Mr. Burton was still the chairman, but then the parties changed hands and the Democrats took over. But I'm happy to tell you that it has continued. The emphasis on investigating the environmental damage from dental amalgam has continued. Now it's under the guidance of Congressman Dennis Kucinich of Ohio. He chairs the Domestic Policy Subcommittee of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. The first hearing that Chairman Kucinich held, he had some doubts. He wasn't so sure. And his staff director brought in pretty much a balanced slate of witnesses, approximately 4 that were anti-amalgam and 4 that were pro-amalgam. But at the end of that hearing, it was clear to him what I've been saying, that there's a lot of problems there. In this case, problems being caused to the environment, and the people that were defending the amalgam just were not being credible. So by the time the second hearing came along, there were 7 anti-amalgam witnesses and only 1 pro-amalgam witness. The pro-amalgam witness, an attorney who called himself the outside counsel for water for the American Dental Association, tried very, very hard to change the focus of the hearing and to mislead, but he was not allowed to do so. Chairman Kucinich, Congresswoman Diane Watson of California, Congressman Dan Burton gave him quite a verbal thrashing, and by then they all had enough knowledge on the subject that they just couldn't get away with the foolishness they had attempted in earlier hearings. The ADA would have us believe that because of their best management practices, which they finally have recommended, the entire problem is solved. They've talked about amalgam separators, and they implied that every dentist in America had the amalgam separators, and they were good ones, and they were being properly serviced. Reality is about 1% of American dentists have the separators. They also strongly implied that it's okay. The wastewater treatment plants take care of the mercury problem. The stuff settles into the sludge, and it's handled. But we had witnesses that said 100% of the sludge finds its way back into the environment, either through incineration or selling as soil amendments to farmers or plant nurseries, etc. It just went on and on and on, subject after subject, and fortunately, at the end of the hearing, it was absolutely, totally, completely clear that amalgam does indeed cause major problems to the environment. It's the largest contributor by far to wastewater treatment plants. It cannot be treated. It's a basic element. It will always be mercury in some form or another, and it will always return to the environment. Now, what good do the hearings do? Well, they can and will lay the basis for future legislation. We have tried some legislation in the past. Didn't gain a lot of traction with it, but there is more sympathy in both parties for this environmental cause, and so we're going to proceed on that front. And now we have the FDA's report itself, in which they document instance after instance and page after page of their own incompetence. Also, and perhaps Jim Love will talk a bit more about this, but there was a good outcome from a recent lawsuit against the FDA, and that is that they took down verbiage from their website about amalgam being safe and effective, and they put in a paragraph that says dental amalgams contain mercury, which may have neurotoxic effects on the nervous systems of developing children and fetuses. When amalgam fillings are placed in the teeth or removed from teeth, they release mercury vapor. Mercury vapor is also released during chewing. FDA's rulemaking will examine evidence concerning whether release of mercury vapor can cause health problems, including neurological disorders in children or fetuses. Now, the website goes on to try to water down that particular paragraph and mislead us into thinking that their rulemaking will take care of the problem. It won't. Now, even if this paragraph is temporary, and it probably is, the FDA is going to get rid of that as soon as the courts allow them to get rid of it. But we have it now. It's in writing. It's from the FDA. And that will, along with the report of their incompetence, go into what's called the finding of facts in the future pieces of legislation. Before you get into the whereases and therefores and this provision and that provision, at the front end of a piece of legislation are the finding of facts. This is true, this is true, this is true, therefore this legislation is needed. So we now have a second piece of information from the FDA itself that will go into the front end of the next legislation. Also, highlights from both of these things will be sent to every member of Congress, House and Senate alike, through what's called the Dear Colleague letters. These are circulated far and wide. Some members ignore them. Some digest them with great detail. A lot of it depends upon their life experiences and their committee assignment. But that's on the table now. Now, there are some other things about the recent lawsuit that didn't suit the IAOMT leadership, but Jim Love is in a much better position to describe that to you than I am, and he will in just a minute. Excuse me, I mispronounced his name. Mike Ziff demanded in our first conversation we ever have that your two mind-altered Southern attorneys always be referred to as Jim Bob and Bob Jim. But at any rate, Jim Bob will be up here in a while and talk about the legal aspects of this. Now, I want to pick up on something David Kennedy said. The misleading quotation that the World Health Organization has declared amalgam safe and effective. This kind of deceit goes on in many ways, perpetrated by the American Dental Association. And one of the things I learned from Jim Bob was their propensity for circular references. And here's a couple of examples. The ADA is falsely looked upon as a real authority on this subject. They're the pinnacle of the dental establishment. Therefore, when the ADA says amalgams are safe and effective, the FDA says, okay, and they publish the notion that they're safe and effective. So then the ADA quotes the FDA as saying they're safe and effective. They do the same thing with the pediatric medical associations. They do the same thing with cancer groups. The ADA feeds them the bogus story that they're safe and effective, they're not causative in any way, shape, or form for the dilemma that that particular group is trying to deal with. That group publishes it on a website, a newsletter, discusses it in a public forum. Then the ADA comes right back and quotes them as the authority, proving their claim that it's safe and effective. It's clever, and it has worked for a period of years, but it's not going to work anymore. A lesson we are trying very, very hard to teach the members of Congress and to their staffs is something we learned from Rich Fisher. And I know you're astonished that we can learn anything from Rich Fisher, but no, I love Rich. He's my personal dentist. I do call him Igor, because every time I see him, he's wearing this white coat, and he jabs sharp instruments in me and what have you. But he just says, shut up, fur face. And he puts things in my mouth, so I stop insulting him. But at any rate, what Rich taught me is finally, after years of controversy on lead, now it is generally acknowledged, it's accepted everywhere, that lead's not a good thing in the human body. It just isn't. But you know what? It wasn't the painters that raised their hand and said, hey, we've got lead in our paint. We got to stop doing that. It wasn't the plumbers that said, gosh, we got to stop using these lead pipes. We're poisoning people. Of course they didn't. They didn't have the knowledge to do that. We couldn't expect them to raise the alarm. Well, we can't expect the ADA to raise the alarm. They don't know squat about biology, neurology, or any of the other subject matters that relate to what happens in the human body from the mercury vapor. They just don't. Occasionally, they trip over the truth, usually when it's documents from a group like the IAOMT. But when they trip over the truth, they just get up and dust themselves off and go on their way as if nothing had happened. But at any rate, that's a lesson we're trying to get taught on Capitol Hill, using the example of the painters and the plumbers. Another thing that became very true or very clear in the environmental hearings was the witnesses from the Environmental Protection Agency. They were content-free. They didn't know much about the subject, and what's more, they didn't care. They just didn't care. Now, some of it may relate to funding. They get hundreds of millions of dollars to deal with smokestack emissions and that kind of thing. And so, since that's what they're funded to do, that is what they do. They have very little budget for studying dental amalgams and what it does in wastewater treatment plants, and therefore they don't study it. Who's their authority that it's safe and effective? The American Dental Association, who then turns around and says the Environmental Protection Agency declares it safe and effective, another circular reference. So this is the kind of battle where we've been fighting down there on the Hill, but we are gaining some traction. It's kind of like a 15-round heavyweight fight. We lost all the earlier rounds. The judges were totally stacked against us. It's like gymnastics judging in China, for instance. And but we've landed several pretty heavy body blows recently. That whitewater whitewash that blew up in their face in September of 2006, which, by the way, Michael Fleming deserves a lot of credit for. He is... I think Mike Fleming should be nominated for knighthood, and because Rich Fisher has testified 3 times before Congress very, very effectively, I don't know, he may be ready for sainthood. But at any rate, you do have members with proper professional credentials that are in there fighting the good fight, and they're doing a heck of a good job for you. Yeah, they really are. So there are going to be more hearings, and those hearings are going to lead to legislation. We have legislators in both houses of Congress now that are listening to us, and in both political parties that are listening to us. We've been extremely careful to not let a partisan flavor creep into this thing. No, nor is there any reason to. There's nothing partisan about this. It's not about right or left. It's about right or wrong. And we're right, and the pro-amalgam people are wrong. So at some point, we will win that heavyweight fight. So the FDA, as I said, they were embarrassed because the report from their own advisory committee blew up in their face. And I know what they did. It was a literature review. And so they based this white paper saying safe and effective on a series of reports that said safe and effective. And they threw out just about all of the other reports that raised an alarm that said there's a problem there. They weren't a part of what they based their white paper on. In Sweden, before they took drastic action to curtail the use of amalgams, they found 1,400 peer-reviewed scientific articles that raised an alarm either for health or the environment about dental mercury. 1,400 of them. But our U.S. FDA hasn't been able to find any. So we're doing our best to help them. And if they still can't find it, well, we're making sure that Congress finds it. The FDA was mortified by their own report of their incompetence. And we'll make sure this receives wide circulation. The Environmental Protection Agency has been proven to be totally out of touch on this particular issue, and that they have a much too cozy relationship with the American Dental Association, and that's who they rely on for their scientific information. So like I say, the door is open to more legislation. It's open to more litigation, as Jim Bob will tell you. The FDA's own words are going to come back and bite them. Oh, let me mention one more thing. I'm sorry if this isn't flowing in a coherent fashion, but as I said, I just learned a short time ago about this. While I worked for Congress, I got a hold of a document from the trade association that publicly owned wastewater treatment plants belong to. Sorry, I can't quote the exact name of the association, but there is an association for publicly owned wastewater treatment plants. The American Dental Association wrote a long document about the effluent, the mercury content of effluents going into the sewage treatment plants. And of course, their conclusion was no problem, no problem. But they did ask this association to peer review it for them. Well, I got a hold of the peer review documents that they diligently worked on for many, many weeks with a committee of experts from around the United States. And if my memory serves me correctly, I counted 163 factual errors in the ADA document. But guess what? The ADA published the original report in their newsletter without one single correction from the sewerage agency being included. And then they had the gall to call their report scientific, definitive, and final. I'm trying real hard, Janet, to not cuss. It's hard. But at any rate, this gives you some flavor of what we've been up against, but it hopefully also gives you some flavor of what we are learning and the kinds of information we're now in a position to put into the hands of Congress. There will be new legislation in the new year, and hopefully it will be more powerful and have more traction than our attempts in the past, because we have many more, I think, compelling documents to back us up. Just one last point, and then I'll sit down and shut up. Something comes along that gives us an opportunity, and this happens only once every 4 years, and sometimes once every 8 years if a president gets reelected. And that's a thing called transition teams. In the 60 days or so, well, 90 days between election and Inauguration Day, it's a short time period, and political operatives are appointed to recommend to the incoming president who should be the head of the agencies and who should be the top tier of political appointees to fill the jobs where they serve at the pleasure of the president. So some of us inside the Beltway types are well aware of that and are trying to position appropriate people to get on the transition teams for the Health and Human Services Department or for the Environmental Protection Agency. Doesn't matter which party wins the presidency. We have people in each party that are going to at least try to be a part of that transition team and therefore be in a position to recommend who should fill some of the top jobs in these agencies. I don't know that we'll accomplish that, but I don't know that we won't. It's not a long shot, it's kind of a middle shot. There are some other things going on that I kind of want to keep confidential right now, because there's bound to be one or more ADA people in the room that's going to report back to them. And we've got to save a few surprises for the next few months that come down the road. But like I say, we've landed a few body blows. We haven't won the fight yet, but we are going to win this fight, because they're wrong and we're right, and eventually we will win out. So thank you for your attention.
As most of you know, I'm Jim Bob, of the now infamous and longtime legal team of Jim Bob and Bob Jim. Bob's here, I trust. Bob Jim, pardon me. I was asked to comment on the course going forward administratively with FDA. 2 evenings ago, the Academy voted to allocate funds to allow me to prepare a petition that will be filed with FDA, in which we will ask FDA to either ban use of amalgam or classify amalgam in Class 3, according to the FDA's regulatory medical and dental device scheme. I don't have time, I'm just going to speak for 5 or 10 minutes, and I don't have time to fully discuss that classification scheme, but as an overgeneralization, there are 3 classifications, 1, 2, and 3. And as you go up in number, the requirements for and the quality of the scientific evidence, the validity of that evidence increases on the manufacturer to demonstrate safety and effectiveness for the proposed dental device for which the manufacturer is seeking approval from FDA. So to repeat that statement slightly in different words, if you're in Class 3, the level of proof is very, very high. If you're in Class 1, it's much lower. An example of a Class 1 device would be a Band-Aid. A Class 3 device would be an implant, and either medical or dental. An implant is defined by FDA as a device that's placed in a surgically or naturally formed cavity in the human body. Well, it seems to me that that fits dental amalgam. And the dental profession is very concerned about that, because there's a requirement that dental devices be placed in Class 3. And Class 3 imposes something called pre-market approval requirements on the manufacturer to demonstrate at a very high level the safety and effectiveness of the implant. Well, so a dental device panel within FDA in 1978 requested that dental amalgam be excused or exempted as an implant. In other words, it would not be considered an implant by FDA, and therefore could be classified in either Class 1 or Class 2. That request was denied by the FDA commissioner in writing, and it became part of the Federal Register. In 1980, nevertheless, and in apparent defiance of that ruling by the commissioner, the dental device panel gathered again, took a vote, and voted to exclude dental amalgam as an implant. In my view, that's a legal nullity. I don't think the dental device panel has the jurisdiction and authority to override the commissioner's ruling, but I suppose that's an issue we'll find out more about in the coming months. If implants have to be classified in Class 3, then we have an interesting decision that's going to be made by FDA in the coming months. They agreed, in connection with litigation filed by Karen Palmer and others, 10 other plaintiffs, to classify dental amalgam in some class within the next year. So sometime before July of 2009, dental amalgam will be classified. All indications are that FDA plans to classify amalgam in Class 2. We think that's inappropriate for the reasons that I've previously stated, and we'll discuss more. If an implant has to be classified in Class 3, then one has to wonder how FDA is going to justify classification of amalgam in Class 2. I don't think they can. I am prepared to go forward in this petition and request that the FDA classify amalgam in Class 3, as I think they must, in view of the fact that this is, in fact, a dental implant. There's a way around that. So, if, in fact, FDA concludes, as I think they have to, that dental amalgam is an implant, then they have to classify it in Class 3 unless the commissioner finds in writing that the device can be generally regarded as safe and effective, and the classification in Class 2 is appropriate. I don't think that can happen for several reasons. I've written down 4 reasons that I've thought of so far. One reason is that FDA has already ruled that mercury, not amalgam, but mercury, cannot be generally regarded as safe. A second reason I don't think that the FDA commissioner can enter findings excusing amalgam from classification in Class 3 is that, as John mentioned, in September of 2006, a blue ribbon panel, hand-selected scientists called the Joint Panels, found that the FDA white paper position paper, which contended that amalgam could be generally regarded as safe, was rejected by vote of, and I don't remember the count now, David Kennedy can probably tell you, the proposition that amalgam is safe was overwhelmingly rejected. A third reason why I don't think FDA can conclude, or the FDA commissioner can properly conclude, that dental amalgam should be generally regarded as safe is Kerr Corporation, the nation's largest manufacturer of amalgam, warns in its material safety data sheets and product warnings that amalgam is a neurotoxin. And really, they make that statement without qualification. They then go on to list a number of adverse effects that can be associated with dental amalgam. FDA relies very heavily, and Mike Fleming will help me back me up on this, FDA relies very heavily on the manufacturers and proponents of these medical and dental devices for information about safety and effectiveness. And it seems to me if Kerr is making a blanket statement that this product is dangerous, it's going to be very, very difficult for the commissioner to properly conclude that this is a device that can be generally regarded as safe. And then a fourth reason that we'll advocate is that the science simply doesn't support the proposition. And we've gone to some trouble in our public comment that I was involved in preparing, along with many others, to lay out the science. It's a summary of the science. Obviously, it's not exhaustive, but we came up with roughly a 30 or 35-page document that has, what, David, 150 to 200 citations to the literature that we think demonstrate very, very substantial health risks that should be associated with this product. So that's sort of the game plan going forward. We'll be filing a petition for ban/classification in Class 3, hopefully sometime in September. Whether we can meet that deadline remains to be seen. I'll be working with several Academy members, but hopefully by end of September, sometime in early October, we'll have that on file. And by the time the deadline rolls around in July of '09, we should be in a position to expect a ruling from FDA, and then, if this Academy decides to do so, go forward with a judicial review of that decision, assuming it's adverse to our contention. So that's sort of a synopsis. Thank you.
Again, I'm Jeff Green. I'm kind of wearing a separate hat, National Director for Citizens for Safe Drinking Water. As many of you have probably heard during part of the conversation, going after the issue of fluoridation has been difficult in court suits. There's been 3 lawsuits, all of which actually dealt with the merits of the situation. All 3 lawsuits came to the same conclusion, that fluoride at 1 part per million in the water both aggravates existing illnesses, it causes adverse health effects, and it actually increases the incidence of cancer deaths. These are the only 3 cases that have ever done in the United States, and all 3 of them came to the same conclusion. There's nothing to the difference. None of those merits have been overturned. However, they were overturned based on the fact that the lawsuits always went against governments, and governments were given an opportunity to basically claim that as long as they had 1 expert witness, then the test was no longer beyond a reasonable doubt. We are in a situation right now where we're planning to file a federal lawsuit, and we're planning to file a federal lawsuit on a very, very narrow issue. That rather than, as in the case that we're talking now, rather than an issue that goes to the FDA, what we're basically filing a lawsuit on is that the plaintiffs are asserting that the water that they're receiving, that the water department that's supplying the water is delivering an unapproved drug. And they're asserting under the 9th and 14th Amendments of the Constitution that they have a right to be free of bodily intrusion, to be being forced into that kind of medication, especially with an unapproved drug. There are a lot of tests that we have to go through that have to do with how you win a lawsuit, but in essence what it's going to ultimately come down to is, was that the intention? was that the intention from the very beginning that the Department of Water actually put the product in the water for the purpose of treating someone. Does the claims that they've made from on a health claim basis, do they constitute a health claim? And does that mean that it triggers what typically means that it's a drug? And then ultimately it comes down to, can the plaintiffs be free from that? Do they have a legal right to be free from that? We've chosen plaintiffs that fit a particular profile. The profile is really important. They are people who cannot escape the water exposures, especially when we talk about not only an oral exposure, but a dermal exposure as well. And so what we plan to be able to project is that there is a dermal exposure. That's one of the methods of this medication, and that in order to create enough water for even just normal hygiene, that it's a near impossibility, if not an economic impossibility anyway. And so what we're intending to do is to file that fairly soon. We're attempting to raise funds to make certain we can do that effectively and to protect the plaintiffs, because this isn't a case that either Citizens for Safe Drinking Water or the International Academy of Rural Medicine and Toxicology is actually a plaintiff in. And so I just want to make certain that I clarify what the lawsuit is not, so that everybody understands. It is not going to make any claim of harm from fluoride. That isn't the purpose. Its purpose is to find out it's either approved or it's not approved by the FDA. It's not a lawsuit against the FDA. It's actually against a particular water district and whether they have the right to choose that particular substance. And so it means we don't have expert witnesses. We have some limitations on cost, meaning that it's going to be a lot less costly than most lawsuits. But that's basically the gist of it. I'd be happy to answer your questions privately if you'd like, but I'm going to turn this over to John at this point.
For those of you who do not know me, my name is John Wilson, and I'm a medical doctor, and not too many of us in this crowd. I practice in Asheville, North Carolina, and I don't know if any of you have tried, after you've been here and been educated about fluoride, have tried to get fluoride out of your community. Well, living in Asheville, which is kind of considered a more progressive community and more enlightened, to some people think at least, I used to perhaps, that it would be a fairly simple thing. All we had to do was to go to the city council and to update them on some of the science that has come down through the literature and through the studies in the 44 years since they voted to fluoridate their community. Well, I just thought it was just a simple matter of informing them about it. So Dr. Young, Matt Young, dentist from Hendersonville, and they get 20% of their water from Asheville, and Dr. James Biddle, a colleague from Asheville, an integrative physician, and the three of us decided we're going to go and have a conversation with the city fathers. And we talked first to the city water manager, and we're a bit shocked when the chief chemist for the city could not pronounce the name hydrofluosilicic acid. So that kind of concerned us initially, but then we talked with the mayor, and the mayor said she'd put it on the agenda. But the long story short was that they ended up putting it on the agenda, never informed us about it being there, and we found out the night before they wouldn't let us present, to the extent that they brought about 25 people in to the city council meeting, including the former head of the state dental board, the heads of the state dental society, the county dental society, the local hospital, the pediatricians, basically accusing us of junk science. And the city council sat like deer in the headlights and finally voted on the preponderance of opinion rather than the preponderance of evidence. And we realized at that point what we were up against. So if we decided we wanted to try to get the water out of Asheville, it would be a very big investment of time, money, to create a political campaign, to try to get a referendum, to vote it out again, and knowing we're up against the system here. Each and every one of you in the community that you live in that's fluoridated, I can about guarantee would be facing the same thing, which is why I'm putting in a plug for Jeff's lawsuit. The Jim Bob have reviewed this case and know that they think it's quite brilliantly conceived case, and it's one that has a really decent chance of getting through. Of course, it is a chance because it's kind of a crapshoot sometimes when you go through the court. You never know what you're going to get depending on the judge and all the different twists and turns it can take. But I put out to you that if this case is successful, it could be the death knell for fluoridation in the water supplies across the country, because when you come back to the councils in the future after this case is won, they would be very hard pressed to not abide by a Supreme Court decision on this case, a federal precedent case. And in doing so, this Academy has voted to support this effort with a $30,000 contribution to the legal fund to get this case up and running. Now, Jeff has basically matching funds that he's already picked up from the private sector. I've contributed $1,000 to this case, and I think if every doctor in this community that understands this issue better than any other community anywhere else does the same, we would fund this thing to the point we could really move forward and end this whole madness called fluoridation of water supply. So I challenge each of you to do that.
I gotta comment on that because that's the American way, and it's kind of cool. I'm from Canada. Dr. Dave Warwick. I'm a fairly new member of this academy, and in Canada we do it a little bit differently. We don't spend much money. So what I was thinking is, if you look at this room, and some of us are a little more well-to-heeled than others, if everybody put in $100, we'd have close to $15,000, which is going to look after this fund. And I gotta make one comment on the executive meeting the other day, because Dave Reggiano, who is one of the founding members of this group, stood up and made some great comments on whether we should enter the legal field, because this is basically what we're doing. And I'm going to tell you, he was concerned, and it was right, and we're taking general funds and putting them into a legal situation. But I also want to tell a quick story about my experience, and this is a plug for Jeff, because Jeff, without taking any money, kind of mentored me into techniques and strategies for our local water board. And they took the fluoride out. I used all this stuff. They took the fluoride out in our water supply 3 days ago. So we got that done.
Hey, congratulations.
And the strategy he's talking about going after the boards is exactly, the water commissions is exactly what you have to do. It took us about 3 years of education, and finally, the last meeting, when I came home in March, I emailed the guy. I always just send nice, pleasant letters, little more evidence, and he emailed me back the last time and said, hey, don't worry about it, the commission voted unanimously to take it out. So, wonderful thing. So, whatever you can handle, just put it into this fund. It'll be great. How you do it is you just have to write a check out to Safe Water, right, Jeff?
Right, there's several ways that you can contribute. One, I believe that we've already set it up so that you can actually contribute to the Safe Drinking Water Legal Fund, and you could probably send it to IAOMT if that's more preferable to you. We actually have a separate fund that's actually just for this particular lawsuit. It's called the Safe Drinking Water Legal Fund. It's available on our website on keepersofthewell.org, which basically means it's keepersofthewell.org. You can actually go on there and put it on a credit card if you want to. You can put it on a PayPal if you want to. You can actually have it directed so that it just goes to the legal fund. If for some reason this case didn't go forward, or we end up with a lot of extra money, or we get paid back somehow or other, it actually will be returned in proportion to the amounts that people put in. So it's not gone down a dead hole. Nobody's using it for administration. David, me, or anyone else, we don't get to take any money. So it all goes for this specifically. So anything that you can contribute, we really do think that this, if it works, and it obviously anything you do in a legal situation is still questionable, but if it does work, it has the opportunity to stop it dead in its track. So thank you very much. Thanks. I hope you contribute. Excuse me? Yes? The address is 1010 University Avenue, number 52. 1010 University Avenue, number 52, San Diego, California, 92103. San Diego, California, 92103. Thank you again for all the support.
Thank you. For the AGD code, under Mark Houston, write in JRJL 0806